The Mandalorian Chapter 14, The Tragedy. Djarin arrives with Grogu on Typhon and finds the ancient temple on top of a mountain. As instructed by Ahsoka, he places Grogu at the center so that he may choose his path on whether he wants to become a Jedi or not. It's then not long until Grogu starts meditating and a protective force field appears around him. During this time, Din sees the Slave One arrive out of nowhere on Typhon from afar and prepares to defend Grogu from this new foe for as long as possible. It's shortly revealed that the pilot was none other than Boba Fett, who's now working with the mercenary Fennec Shand, whose life he managed to save back on Tatooine. The two start off as this episode's antagonists, demanding Din that he return Boba his Mandalorian armor or else they'll kill Grogu. Despite this threat, Din affirms to Boba that only a Mandalorian can wear the armor, even asking Fett several times if he is a Mandalorian or not, with Fett each time making it clear that he isn't, other than claiming that his father was given the armor by Mandalorians. Following a tense confrontation between the two parties, Din sees no way out of the situation without Grogu getting hurt, and eventually is forced to trade the armor for the safety of his adopted son. However, before the trade can be finalized, two Imperial transport shuttles arrive, each disgorging stormtroopers who attempt to capture Grogu and kill anyone standing in their way. Honoring their agreement, Boba, Fennec, and Din join forces to fight back against the advancing stormtroopers, who in turn suffer heavy casualties, especially once Boba does regain his armor back from inside the Razor Crest. Unfortunately, Moff Gideon arrives in an Imperial light cruiser and destroys Din's Razor Crest from orbit, which goes without saying really sucks for Din, who only just got it fixed. But it's not that much of a big deal for us fans at least, as we of course know the Razor Crest, or I suppose Razor Crest 2.0, does appear later in the Battle of Exegol. So I'm guessing Din will simply just find another Razor Crest, so this probably won't be a big deal after all. But nonetheless, it is still pretty much a downer of a moment. Anyways, Gideon then deploys 4 Dark Troopers onto the battlefield, who shortly after manage to kidnap Grogu and take him aboard their cruiser before fleeing away, all before Din can even get close enough to help. With Grogu captured and the Razor Crest destroyed, Boba and Fennec luckily inform Din that they will help save Grogu to honor their debt that they had agreed upon from the trade deal. With the armor back in his ownership, Boba then takes the opportunity to prove that he wasn't lying about the armor belonging to his father. And using his chain code, he reveals to Din that his father, Jango Fett, was actually a Mandalorian foundling, and thus was given the armor to him by Mandalorians. This information then helps Din feel somewhat better about Boba having the armor, in that at least he has some Mandalorian connection than none at all. With their intentions now clear, Boba, Din, and Fennec travel to Navarro seeking the help of Marshal Cara Dune, who's revealed that she's since rejoined the New Republic. While not entirely eager to help at first, she then changes her mind when she finds out that Grogu had been captured. Din then asks her to locate the criminal Miggs Mayfeld, who he imprisoned back in Season 1, all in order to help track Gideon's cruiser and rescue Grogu. Meanwhile, on the Imperial Light Cruiser, Grogu remains in captivity but keeps using whatever energy he has left to try and hurt his stormtrooper guards. He does this interestingly enough using both light and dark side powers, such as Force Push and even Force Choke. When seeing this happen right before him, Gideon is noticeably impressed with Grogu's Force powers, even using the Darksaber to tease the helpless young Jedi youngling, fully knowing he can't fight back. Once stunning Grogu, Gideon then alerts his personnel to inform Dr. Pershing that the midichlorian donor is available, and should soon be ready for experimentation once again. So, well, now this was a very interesting episode. Not just because even though it was the shortest of the season thus far, but how it managed to still somehow pack so much in it. And honestly, I'm probably gonna be in the minority again here by saying that I've got mixed feelings about this episode. It does start out well as we're already at Typhon, something that I know a lot of us assumed would be pushed back until the end of the season. But surprisingly, they didn't do that, so that was great to see. Not to mention the little bonding moment between Din and Grogu, which was also kind of sweet, but yeah, I believe this being the first time also in the series that we even get to hear Din laugh too. It's clear that he's grown very fond of the little green Jedi youngling, and it makes it even more emotional afterwards once he does lose him. Anyways, when on Typhon, it doesn't take too long until the slave freaking one comes into the scene. And I'll be honest, I wasn't too surprised as I did hear rumors it would show up this season and figured it would be in this episode. However, even when expecting it, I was still in somewhat disbelief that after all these years, we finally got to see the Slave One in live action once again. So that was awesome. That said, seeing Boba Fett then show up with Fennec Shand was kind of random and brought a lot of questions to the table too. On one hand, I like it. Boba has a female sniper just like Daddy Jango had with Zam Wesell, so there's that. And due to spoilers, I also already knew that Fennec was showing up again in this season, so that was expected for me. But what I didn't know is how she survived. Which that's of course quickly kind of glossed over here by showing that Boba gave her a robotic stomach, which, I guess it works. But I actually found myself questioning more so on how Boba even knew how to do something like that in the first place. Or where he even got the parts from and so on, so yeah. I can only imagine from during his time on Tatooine that he probably picked up some skills from the Jawas and that's how he made this happen, I don't know, but either way, it was odd, but I'll take it. It was also nice to get that confirmation to what myself and I'm sure others speculated back in season 1 that it was indeed Boba and not Moff Gideon or some other rando that saved Fennec. I mean, come on, the Spur sound was such a big giveaway. As for Boba himself, I always was under the impression the guy was basically stuck on Tatooine against his will. I mean, come on, look at him, he looks terrible. He's wearing a space hobo getup and uses a Tusken gaffy stick as a weapon for Christ's sake. There's no way that was done by choice, especially if he still had access to the Slave One where I'm sure he keeps all his credits. That he could have used to buy some decent temporary armor and get off Tatooine, but nope, apparently he just vibed on Tatooine for 5 years doing what seems to us nothing. What's worse is he even knew Cobb Vanth had his armor all these years and yet surprisingly did nothing about it. Which, let's be real, had he really wanted to get it back from Cobb, he was more than capable of doing so. But regardless of that, this episode does at least actually confirm for the first time in canon that Jango Fett was indeed a Mandalorian. This is of course a retcon as before, George Lucas and Dave Filoni didn't consider Jango a Mandalorian for many years. But I suppose with George now out of the picture, Filoni backpedaled on that stance. Which I'd be very curious to hear what George thinks about this now as he was very much against this idea. If anything, it's clear that Filoni feels less limited now without George, and that can be both a good and a bad thing when you think about it. That said, the same can't be said for Boba, who still isn't a real Mandalorian. While it's true that Jango was a foundling, Boba, on the other hand, a clone of a foundling that has no allegiance to anyone, is not a real Mandalorian. As we know that being a Mandalorian is a creed, a way of life, not a race. And Boba quite clearly doesn't care about being a Mandalorian when Din asks him, even straight out refusing to call himself one as all he wants is just his armor back. So while this episode did definitely answer the question if Jango was a Mandalorian in canon, Boba's status as a Mandalorian on the other hand seems to be purposefully left ambiguous. While Boba does have a Mandalorian connection thanks to his father, he himself never took the Mandalorian creed and therefore doesn't see himself as one, nor of course does he even care. I'm sure had Din not been forced into trading Boba back his armor, then he wouldn't have given it back after seeing Boba's feelings towards Mandalorians, but regardless, it was an interesting confrontation nonetheless. That all said, once Boba does regain his armor back, he's even more badass than Din Djarin ever was. I guess finally putting an end to all those conversations claiming Boba didn't do anything or that he's useless. And while it was good to see Boba back in his iconic armor, a bit of me felt disappointed, fully knowing that now this means Cobb Vanth won't get it back, and as a result, likely now won't show up again in the season. Which sucks for me as a Cobb fan, but what can you do? At least the Boba fans are really enjoying this. As for the armor itself, I'm not exactly a big fan of Filoni retconning it to be actually Jango's old armor, as I preferred George's original idea that it was pieces of other Mandalorian armor that Boba himself found and put together over time, basically being this hodgepodge of different armors and making it unique and stand out more. Not to mention, when you do compare Boba's and Jango's armor together, you do notice subtle differences between the two, which makes it harder to believe that they are one and the same. And while on that topic, didn't Boba blow up Jango's helmet while trying to kill Mace Windu back in the Clone Wars too? So either Filoni forgot about this, which believe it or not he can, as evidenced to Sam Witwer admitting this from his conversations with Filoni behind the scenes during Rebels, or Boba simply used a fake helmet in that Clone Wars episode. Either way, I'm not a fan of this retcon of the armor. As, let's not forget, Jango's armor originally was Durasteel and not Beskar, hence why it got blown up in that episode so easily. And while on the topic of legends, it should be mentioned that one little cool Easter egg in relation to the armor is that the chain code itself mentions Jastar Muriel. And for anyone who doesn't know, Jastar Muriel was the Mandalorian who back in Legends adopted Jango and trained him. So it's neat to see this character's name be canonized, especially with of course Jango now being considered a Mandalorian and all. Aside from that, what I will say that gave me mixed feelings about this episode was with how it was directed and shot, which felt very, I don't know, fan-filmy. There was no cinematic flair to any of the shots or lighting, and overall it seemed quite amateurish. Especially the 3D effects of the stormtroopers running down the hill or from or into the transports. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say, it just felt sloppy and not quite the quality that we've come to expect from this beautiful show. And believe me, you compare the quality of shots and action from let's say episode 1 to this and you'll no doubt see a difference. Of course, the second I learned that Robert Rodriguez, the guy best known for directing the Spy Kids movies, which even back in the day were considered visually amateurish and just silly action movies for kids, then it was at that moment I knew to set my expectations pretty low for this episode. Again, I know I'm the minority here, but honestly, I do think this was the worst directed episode of the season. Sure, it had a lot of action, Boba Fett, Dark Troopers, and so on, but I can only imagine how much better this episode would have been if, say, someone like Jon Favreau, or Deborah Chow, Taika Waititi, or even Rick Famuyiwa had directed it instead. Again, I'm not saying this was the worst episode, just the worst directed episode in my opinion. As for Typhon the planet, it seemed to be the most boring planet we've seen on the show to date. Just a dusty hillside behind an LA production lot, not exactly something that springs to mind when you think of a Star Wars location, does it? Also, is it just me that thinks this is stupid, but why did Din just leave his jetpack on the rocks when the Empire did show up? I mean, he could have saved Grogu if he had just put it on and got to him in time rather than running up the hill like he did by foot. Also, why is he missing his jetpack when on Navarro talking to Kara? I mean, I highly doubt he forgot his jetpack on Typhon and all, but yeah. I guess Rodriguez just forgot about the jetpack. Also, I do have to mention that I wasn't thrilled to see the similar looking First Order transports used here, as I'd much rather had seen TIE Reapers or even the traditional Lambda shuttles be deployed here instead. It's a small nitpick, I know, but it felt unnecessary and made a transport that was previously unique to the First Order now, well, not as original or cool anymore. But again, that's just a small nitpick on my part. Other than that, this was an enjoyable episode and has given us even more questions to think about for the final 2 episodes left in Season 2, and then for Season 3 as a whole. Most importantly, who was the Jedi that Grogu communicated with on Typhon? Personally, after all we've seen thus far on this show, my money's on it being Luke Skywalker. However, considering the final 2 episodes will all be about getting Grogu back like in Season 1, then I think it's safe to say we'll have to wait until Season 3 to see Luke Skywalker in live action again, as I think we'll only get a name drop at most in Episode 8, but yeah. That said, I'm fine if that's the case, as it will only give us something real cool to look forward to in Season 3, and I'm all for it. But that was my take on this episode of The Mandalorian. Let me know what you all thought about the episode in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.